What if everything you thought you knew about wealth, family, and loyalty was a lie? Here is a controversial idea for you. What if the only way to truly test the character of the people you love is to become someone they would never, ever respect? Most people believe that money solves problems, but for one billionaire, he feared it was the very thing destroying his family's soul. He had everything he could ever want, except the one thing he desperately needed to know what was truly in his children's hearts. And the answer, he feared, would shatter him. This isn't just another story about a rich family. This is a story that holds a powerful, almost dangerous lesson about human nature. A lesson that you can apply in your own life within the next few minutes. The billionaire came to a shocking conclusion to find the truth. He had to orchestrate the ultimate lie. He embarked on a plan so extreme, so radical, that it sounds like something out of a movie. He decided to stage his own death and go undercover as a homeless man on the very streets that bore his name, all to see who his children really were. What he discovered is a raw and explosive testament to the battle between wealth versus character. He gave each of his children a chance to show their true colors, and the results will not only shock you, but they will force you to look at your own relationships differently. This story contains a twist so powerful it redefines what it means to be worthy of a legacy. It's a journey into a fake death, real lesson, and it proves that sometimes the person with nothing is the one who truly has it all. Before we dive into this incredible story, if you believe that character is more important than cash, make sure you hit that follow button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. And I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop your city or country in the comments below. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get into it. You know, it's a funny thing about looking at the end of the road. For some, it's a finish line they're terrified to cross, but for a man like Victor Langston, it was just the beginning of a whole new game. He decided it was time to stage his final act, not with a bang, but with a carefully orchestrated whisper. The news of his terminal illness spread like wildfire, a somber headline that was, in reality, the first move in a brilliant, albeit painful strategy. This wasn't about dying, it was about orchestrating the ultimate billionaire's ultimate lesson for those he was leaving behind. It's one thing to build an empire of steel and glass, but it's another thing entirely to build a legacy that lasts. Victor understood this better than anyone. Had read the greats, not just business reports, but books that dig into the human soul. Like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He knew that true wealth isn't just in a bank account, it's etched into the character of the people you influence. His plan was more than just a will, it was a carefully designed father's final test, a way to see what his life's work had truly built in the hearts of his family. Imagine the sheer audacity of it all. A man at the peak of his success, choosing to trade his tailored suits for a narrative of decay and decline. It wasn't about morbidity, it was about clarity. He felt that only by simulating his end could he get a true picture of the people who stood to inherit his world. This wasn't just a fake death, real lesson, it was a desperate search for truth in a world that had become cluttered with yes-men and empty pleasantries. He was about to find out if compassion wins everything or if greed was the only real currency. This decision wasn't made in a sterile boardroom with charts and projections. It was likely made late at night, staring at family photos and wondering where things went sideways. When you give people everything they could ever want, do you rob them of the chance to become everything they could ever be? That was the question haunting Victor. His bold move was setting the stage for an inheritance test twist that no one could see coming, a high-stakes gamble on the very soul of his family. He had to become a ghost in his own life, a silent observer watching the ripples of his impending departure. Every hushed conversation, every crocodile tear, every opportunistic phone call would be a data point in his grand experiment. It's a profound thought, isn't it? To truly know how people feel about you, you almost have to cease to exist for them. This elaborate plan was the foundation for what would become a shocking hidden identity reveal, designed to separate authentic connection from calculated performance. So the curtain began to rise on Victor's final play. The world saw a powerful billionaire fading away, but what was really happening was far more potent. He was setting up a chessboard where the pieces were his own children, and the game wasn't for his fortune, but for his legacy of truth. The question that hung in the air, thick with unspoken tension, wasn't about who would get the money, but about who they had become in its shadow. What had decades of immense privilege done to their character? So why go to such extreme lengths? Well, Victor Langston looked at his two sons, Leo and Marcus, and saw a reflection of his success, but not his values. They wore the family name like an expensive watch, flashy, impressive, but ultimately just an accessory. Had given them the world on a silver platter, but in doing so, had forgotten to teach them how to hold their own fork. This wasn't just disappointment. It was the heartbreaking realization that his greatest assets might be his greatest failures. A classic and painful case of wealth versus character. Think about it in your own life. You can often tell more about a person by how they treat someone who can do nothing for them than by how they treat a boss or a client. It's a simple litmus test. Victor saw his sons treat the world as their personal playground, utterly oblivious to the quiet dignity of the people who kept it running. He knew that before he could pass on his fortune, he had to engineer a father's final test. The plan began to form, a painful but necessary surgery to find out if there was any heart left beneath the entitlement. This was his last-ditch effort, to teach the billionaire's ultimate lesson, that character is the only currency that can't be spent. Head over here conversations filled not with passion or purpose, but with complaints about the speed of the yacht's Wi-Fi or the quality of the champagne. They had become caricatures of wealth, and the thought of his empire built on grit and vision falling into such careless hands was unbearable. The stage was being set for the entitled heirs, exposed part of his plan. It's a terrifying question for any parent, isn't it? Have I prepared my children for the path, or have I just prepared the path for my children? Victor felt the sting of that question every single day. He saw that their empathy muscles had atrophied from lack of use. So he designed a scenario so raw and real that it would bypass all their usual defenses. It was a high-stakes gamble, a true inheritance test twist designed to force them to look at the world and themselves without the filter of fortune. He knew the risks. This deception could shatter their relationships forever, a potential family betrayal and redemption story waiting to unfold, for better or worse. But the risk of doing nothing was greater. The risk was leaving a legacy of emptiness, a hollow crown passed to heirs who didn't understand its weight. His plan wasn't born from malice, but from a desperate, fatherly love, via hope that he could still reach the men they were supposed to be, not just the boys they had become. This wasn't just about his children anymore, it was about his life's meaning. What good is an empire if its soul is corrupt? The decision was made. He would strip away his identity, his power, and his name to see them for who they truly were. He was about to embark on the most elaborate homeless disguise plot imaginable, a journey into the shadows to find a glimmer of light in the people he was supposed to trust the most. The curtain was about to fall on Victor Langston, the billionaire. And just like that, Victor Langston vanished. One day he was a titan of industry, his name on buildings and in headlines the next. He was a ghost haunting the very streets he once commanded. The transformation was more than just a costume of rags and dirt. It was a psychological deep dive, a shedding of ego that few people could ever endure. He became a billionaire disguised as homeless, not for a TV show, but for a raw, unfiltered look at reality. It was the ultimate embodiment of his search for a legacy of truth. It's a powerful exercise in perspective. Try it sometime, not by dressing up, but by simply moving through your day trying to be invisible. Sit on a park bench and just watch. Listen, You'll be stunned by what you learn when you're no longer the main character in your own movie. For Victor, this wasn't an exercise, it was his new life. He learned the city's rhythms from a new, harsh angle, cold bite of the wind, the ache of an empty stomach, and the crushing weight of being looked through, not at. His meticulously crafted homeless disguise plot was a masterpiece of anonymity. A prosthetic nose, a matted gray wig, dirt skillfully applied to create the illusion of years of hardship. He looked in the mirror and didn't see himself. He saw Anthony, a name he gave his new identity, a man with no past and no future. This hidden identity was his shield and his lens, allowing him to get closer to the truth than any private investigator ever could. This was ground zero for the father's final test. He chose a spot on a busy downtown corner, a place his children would surely pass. The irony was staggering. He was now a piece of the urban landscape he had helped fund, a forgotten man sitting in the shadow of a skyscraper, bearing his own name. He felt the humiliation, the shame, and the fear. But underneath it all, a strange sense of freedom began to bubble up. Without his name and his wealth, he was finally untethered from expectation, a nobody with nothing to lose. The first few days were a brutal education. He saw the world divided not into rich and poor, but into the seen and the unseen. He was firmly in the latter category. People's eyes would slide right past him, their minds already on their next meeting or their expensive lunch. This experience was the crucible that would forge the billionaire's ultimate lesson. He wasn't just testing his children, the city was testing him, breaking him down to his very essence to see what remained. He was now perfectly positioned. He was a silent observer at the heart of his own experiment, waiting for the pieces to move on the board. The carefully constructed world of Victor Langston was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of Anthony, the homeless man. Now it was only a matter of time before his old world and his new one would collide. He wondered who, if anyone, would notice the man hidden in plain sight. The encounters began, each one a small, calculated intersection of two completely different worlds. It wasn't by accident Victor, as Anthony, made sure he was in the right place at the right time, a silent audition for his own children. First came Leo, his eldest, walking out of a high-end coffee shop, complaining loudly on his phone about a deal that wasn't going his way. He didn't even glance at the man huddled by the door, a perfect stranger. The hidden identity reveal was still a long way off, but the first results of the test were already coming in. It's truly incredible how our expectations shape our reality. His children were looking for a powerful, commanding father figure, so the broken, invisible man on the sidewalk simply didn't register. They saw a problem, a piece of urban decay, not a person. It speaks volumes about how we categorize people, doesn't it? We put them in boxes: business associate, barista, homeless guy, and we interact with the box, not the human being inside. Victor was feeling the sharp edges of that box firsthand. Then came Marcus, the younger son, who almost tripped over Victor's outstretched legs. There was a flicker of something annoyance, not recognition. He muttered a curse word under his breath and adjusted his tie, striding off toward his luxury car without a backward glance. For Victor, each of these moments was a small heartbreak, a confirmation of his deepest fears. The father's final test was proving to be more painful than he could have ever imagined. A stark commentary on wealth versus character. These weren't just casual encounters, they were controlled experiments. Victor would sometimes let out a soft cough, or a quiet plea for spare change, just to see if it would break the spell of their self-absorption. It never did. They were locked in their own orbits, oblivious to the quiet desperation just feet away. This elaborate homeless disguise plot was revealing a truth he wasn't sure he was ready for to his sons. He was utterly and completely invisible. It was a slow, painful burn, watching the children he raised look right through him with empty eyes. He wasn't just a billionaire disguised as homeless, he was a father realizing the vast, empty canyon that had grown between him and his sons. Each non-interaction was another nail in the coffin of his hope for them, a clear sign that their inheritance was seen as a right, not a responsibility. The whole situation was becoming a tragic lesson in what happens when kindness over bloodline is a foreign concept. The evidence was mounting, painting a grim picture of their character. He had given them every advantage in life, yet he had failed to give them the one thing that truly mattered: compassionate eyes. He had set the stage for them to show him who they were, and they were succeeding, just not in the way a father would hope. The test for his sons seemed to be drawing to a bleak conclusion. As the days turned into a week, the passive avoidance from his sons morphed into something uglier. Their annoyance became more vocal. "Can't they do something about him?" Leo grumbled to his assistant one afternoon, loud enough for Victor to hear every single word. The comment was a dagger, not because of the complaint itself, but because it came from his own flesh and blood. The entitled heir's exposed phase of his experiment was revealing a chilling lack of basic human decency. Their father was right there, and they were wishing him away. This wasn't just a failure of recognition, it was a failure of empathy. It's the difference between not seeing someone and actively wishing they weren't there. We see this play out in smaller ways every day: the frustration at a slow driver, the annoyance with a crying baby on a plane. It's a slip into a world where our own comfort is paramount. For Leo and Marcus, their comfort was being disturbed by a constant reminder of a reality they preferred to ignore. This was the core conflict of wealth versus character playing out on a city sidewalk. Marcus, on the other hand, took a different approach: mockery. One evening, he left the office building with a group of colleagues, laughing. He pointed a finger toward Victor and said, "Now there's a guy who really cornered the market on zero assets." The group chuckled, and the sound echoed in the cavernous street, each laugh a small betrayal. Victor just lowered his head, the sting of the words far colder than the evening air. The family betrayal and redemption arc seemed to be leaning heavily on the betrayal part. Can you imagine the strength it took for Victor not to stand up and reveal himself right then and there? 2. Scream, "Your father!" But he held back, because the goal was bigger than his own pain. He was committed to seeing this through, to finishing the father's final test, no matter the personal cost. He was gathering the truth, however ugly, because it was the only thing that mattered now. This was all part of the billionaire's ultimate lesson for them and for himself. He realized his son saw him as nothing more than an obstacle, a piece of human debris cluttering up the pristine entrance to their world of success. They had learned to manage assets, to close deals, and to command boardrooms, but they had never learned the simple, profound art of seeing another person's humanity. Their callousness was a direct product of a life without struggle, a life where every problem could be paid to go away. And so, Victor sat on his cold patch of concrete, absorbing their scorn like a sponge. The data for his experiment was now overwhelmingly clear. In the eyes of his sons, he was worthless, a nuisance to be avoided or mocked. The foundation of his legacy, it seemed, was rotten to the core, but the test wasn't over. There was still one more piece on the chessboard, one more child to encounter. Just when the despair was about to set in completely, a different figure appeared. It was Emma, his estranged daughter. He hadn't seen her in years, not since Head cut her off for, in his eyes, throwing her life away. She wasn't emerging from the gleaming lobby of his corporate headquarters. She was walking home from her job as a waitress, her shoulders slumped with the familiar exhaustion of someone who works hard for too little. And then she stopped. She didn't just glance, she stopped and looked right at him. For the first time in weeks, someone's eyes met his, and they weren't filled with annoyance or pity, but with a simple, direct acknowledgement. "You look like you're having a rough day," she said, her voice soft. The sound of it, so full of a warmth he hadn't realized had missed, nearly broke his composure. In that single moment, A new, unexpected possibility emerged in his grim experiment. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes kindness over bloodline isn't just a saying, it's a profound truth, even when it's your own blood. The irony was crushing. His sons, who had been given everything, offered nothing but contempt. Emma, who had been given nothing, in fact, had been punished for her choice, was the only one who saw a fellow human being. This was the inheritance test twist he had designed, but the result was more potent than he could have ever anticipated. He had disowned her for choosing love over money, and here she was, showing him that her character was worth more than his entire fortune. She didn't have much. He could see it in her worn-out shoes and the careful way she clutched her handbag. Yet, she reached into her bag and pulled out her wrapped sandwich, her own dinner most likely. "Here," she said. "It's not much, but I hope it helps." She offered it with a small, genuine smile. There was no fanfare, no expectation of thanks. It was a simple, pure act of compassion. For Victor, it felt like the first ray of sunshine after a long, brutal winter. He simply nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat, and took the sandwich. As she turned to leave, he saw the real legacy of his family wasn't in the sons, who mirrored his success, but in the daughter who mirrored the integrity he thought he had lost. This single small act was a seismic event in the father's final test. It suggested that perhaps all was not lost, that true wealth had taken root in the most unexpected corner of his family tree. This was the moment the entire experiment pivoted. It was no longer just about exposing the flaws of his sons, it was now about discovering the hidden strength of his daughter. The estranged daughter. Chosen theme wasn't a decision yet, but a seed had just been planted in the most profound way possible. He watched her walk away, a tired, struggling woman who had just shown more grace and nobility than his two princes ever had. That first sandwich wasn't a one-time event. The next day, Emma came back. This time, she brought a steaming cup of coffee and sat down on the curb a respectful distance away. "It's cold out here," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to share a coffee break with a homeless stranger. She didn't ask prying questions or offer empty platitudes. She just offered her presence. And for a man who had felt invisible for weeks, being seen was a gift more valuable than gold. She started making it a routine. Some days she brought a hot meal shed gotten from the restaurant where she worked. One evening, as the temperature dropped, she appeared with 2 thick blankets she'd bought from a thrift store. "This should help a bit," she said, wrapping one around his shoulders. He could see the strain in her eyes. This small expense was likely a significant sacrifice for her. Yet she gave freely, without a hint of resentment. It was a living, breathing demonstration that compassion wins everything. They would talk. She'd tell him about her day's difficult customers, her husband struggles to sell his paintings, their leaky faucet. She never complained, she just shared. And she would ask him about his day too, listening patiently to his mumbled one-word answers as Anthony. It was in these quiet conversations that Victor saw her true character shine. She wasn't helping him to feel good about herself, she was helping him because she genuinely cared. This was the billionaire's ultimate lesson unfolding in real time. It's a principle you can apply in your own life. Generosity isn't about how much you give, it's about what it costs you to give it. A millionaire giving $1,000 is a gesture, a person struggling to pay rent giving $10 is a profound act of sacrifice and love. Emma was living that truth. She gave from her scarcity, not her abundance, and that made her gifts infinitely more precious. This was the starkest contrast imaginable to her brother's careless entitlement. Victor, the master strategist, was completely disarmed by her simple, consistent decency. His whole homeless disguise plot had been designed to catch people at their worst, to expose their greed and selfishness. He never anticipated it would so powerfully reveal someone's goodness. Emma's actions weren't for an audience, they were for a forgotten man on a cold street corner. She was unknowingly passing the father's final test with flying colors. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet, daily acts of grace. Each blanket, each cup of coffee, each moment of shared silence was building a case. A case for what? Victor wasn't yet sure. But he knew he was witnessing something extraordinary. He was seeing the stark difference between a life built on acquiring things and a life built on connecting with people. Emma, the daughter he had cast aside, was teaching him a lesson about his own legacy of truth, a lesson he had been too blind to see. As a particularly cold snap hit the city, Emma's concern for Anthony grew. She stopped by one afternoon, her face etched with worry. "You can't stay out here tonight." "It's not safe," she insisted, her breath misting in the frigid air. She had spent her day off not resting, but calling local shelters, trying to find an open bed. It was an act of advocacy, a step beyond charity into the realm of true compassion. She wasn't just giving him things, she was fighting for his well-being. She eventually found a spot at a small church-run shelter a few blocks away. She didn't just give him the address, she walked him there herself, making sure he got inside safely. To the shelter staff, she was just a concerned citizen. To Victor, she was a guardian angel in a worn-out coat. This went so far beyond the initial scope of his father's final test. He had set up a simple pass-fail scenario, but Emma was writing a whole new essay on the nature of human goodness. What's so powerful about her actions is the lack of judgment. Think about it. It's easy to help the deserving poor, the people whose stories fit our neat narratives. But Emma never asked Anthony how he ended up on the streets. She didn't lecture him or offer unsolicited advice. She simply accepted him as he was and offered help where she could. This is a profound form of respect, one that her wealthy brothers, for all their education, had never learned. It was a pure example of kindness over bloodline. Over the next few weeks, she would visit him at the shelter, bringing a book or just sitting with him in the common area. Her presence was a quiet anchor in the chaotic world he now inhabited. She was showing him that dignity isn't something that can be taken from you by circumstance. It's something that is affirmed in you by the compassion of others. This wasn't just a test of character anymore, it was becoming a deep, emotional journey for Victor, forcing him to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about strength and success. The entire homeless disguise plot had taken on a life of its own. It started as a way to judge his children, but it had become a conduit for him to receive the most profound kindness he had ever known. And it was coming from the one person he had wronged the most. The weight of that irony was immense. He was witnessing firsthand how compassion wins everything, not in a grand dramatic battle, but in the quiet, persistent care of one person for another. This consistent, selfless support was the final piece of evidence. He had seen the casual cruelty of his sons and the profound, sacrificial love of his daughter. The results of his experiment were undeniable. The question was no longer about who was worthy of the inheritance. The question was, what was he going to do with this powerful, painful truth? The legacy of truth he had sought was now staring him right in the face. Behind the facade of Anthony, the frail, homeless man, Victor Langston was undergoing a profound transformation. He watched Emma navigate her difficult life with a grace and resilience that humbled him to his core. He saw her leaving her apartment before dawn, heading to a job that clearly exhausted her, and returning late at night, yet she always made time for him. Her strength wasn't loud or boastful, it was a quiet, steady flame that refused to be extinguished by hardship. It was the kind of strength that builds legacies, not just fortunes. He was moved, deeply and irrevocably. All his life, he had associated strength with power, with boardroom takeovers and shrewd negotiations. But now, he saw that true strength was in Emma's unwavering integrity. It was in her choice to be kind when she herself was struggling, to give when she had almost nothing. This quiet power was the billionaire's ultimate lesson. He, the man who could buy anything, was learning the value of things that could never be bought. His disguise, the homeless disguise plot, had become a one-way mirror. She saw a man in need, but he saw the unfiltered soul of his daughter. He saw her patience, her grit, her unwavering moral compass. These were the very qualities he had tried to instill in his sons, the qualities he had prized in himself when he was a young man building his empire from nothing. He had mistakenly believed these values had vanished from his bloodline, but they hadn't. They were just living in the heart of the child he had pushed away. It was a stark and painful revelation. The entire inheritance test twist was yielding. A result had never considered that he had been completely wrong. Wrong about Emma, wrong about her husband, and wrong about what defines a successful life. He had measured worth in dollars and cents, in assets and acquisitions. Emma measured it in kindness and connection. And her ledger was infinitely more impressive than his. He realized with a jolt that the estranged daughter chosen was not just a possibility, but a moral imperative. He felt a mix of immense pride and crushing guilt. Pride in the incredible woman his daughter had become, not because of him, but in spite of him. And guilt for his blindness, for the years he had wasted being angry over a choice that had clearly forged her into a person of substance and character. This was the raw, unfiltered truth he had been seeking, a legacy of truth that was both beautiful and agonizing to behold. He watched her one evening, sharing a simple meal with her husband, the struggling artist, in their tiny apartment across the street. He saw them laughing, their faces illuminated by a cheap lamp, and he saw more wealth in that small room than existed in his sprawling, empty mansion. The test was over. He had his answer. The only question now was how to unravel the complex web of deception he had woven. Now came the hardest part. The test was complete, the results were in, and the truth was undeniable. But how do you end the play when you're still on stage, in costume? Victor wrestled with himself every single day. The urge to cast off the rags, to hug his daughter and tell her how proud he was almost overwhelming. But he hesitated. The moment he revealed his identity, the beautiful, authentic connection he had forged with Emma, as Anthony would be gone forever. He feared that the hidden identity reveal would taint everything. Would her kindness suddenly seem like a performance if she knew he was a billionaire? Would she look at him with confusion, or worse, with betrayal in her eyes? The purity of what he had witnessed was a precious, fragile thing. It was born of her seeing a man with nothing, not her father with everything. He couldn't bear the thought of losing that, of questioning the motive behind the most genuine acts of love he had ever received. This is a dilemma many of us face in smaller ways. We want the raw, honest truth from people, but we're afraid of how our own status, our power, or our position might influence what they say. It's why leaders sometimes use secret shoppers, or why parents ask teachers for the real story. Victor was in the ultimate version of this dilemma. His homeless disguise plot had given him a priceless gift. Unfiltered truth, and revealing himself felt like it might shatter the very thing he had sought. He was caught in a paradox of his own making. To reward Emma for her incredible character, he had to become Victor Langston again. But becoming Victor Langston again might destroy the very relationship that proved she was worthy. The father's final test had backed him into a corner. He knew he had to move forward, but every path seemed fraught with peril. It was a high-stakes, emotional chess game, and he was running out of moves. For a few more days, he said nothing. He simply cherished the moments with her, absorbing her kindness, trying to burn the memory of Anthony's friendship with Emma into his soul. He knew this chapter was coming to an end, that the fake death, real lesson phase of his plan was the next logical, terrifying step. He had to disappear as Anthony so that Victor Langston could deliver his final verdict. It was the only way to make the lesson stick. He was terrified of hurting her, the one person who had shown him unconditional compassion. The potential for a family betrayal and redemption story was at its peak, And he knew the reveal would feel like a deep betrayal before any redemption could even be contemplated. He took a deep breath, knowing what he had to do next. He had to let Anthony fade away to set the stage for the final, shocking act. The next phase of the plan was set in motion with cold, corporate efficiency. A press release was issued from Langston Industries. It was somber, professional, and utterly convincing. It is with great sadness it began that we announce the health of our founder. Victor Langston has taken a turn for the worse. The carefully chosen words created a sense of impending finality. The news cycle picked it up instantly. The world was now officially on a death watch for a man who was perfectly healthy, albeit cold and heartsore. A few days later, the final announcement came: Victor Langston was dead. The news rocketed across the globe. Tributes poured in from dignitaries and business leaders, all mourning the loss of a titan. It was a masterfully executed deception, the ultimate fake death, real. Lesson. For the public, it was the end of an era. For Victor's family, it was the trigger for the final act of his test. He, from his hidden vantage point, watched the world react to his own passing. It was the most surreal experience of his life. This news, of course, reached his children. For Leo and Marcus, the news of their father's death was likely met with a complex cocktail of emotions, perhaps a flicker of sadness, but mostly a surge of anticipation. Their time had come. The empire was now theirs for the taking, or so they thought. They were completely oblivious to the inheritance test twist that was about to upend their entire reality. Their grieving was overshadowed by the imminent reading of the will, the day their entitlement would finally be rewarded. And what about Emma? She heard the news on a small television in the corner of the diner where she worked. She saw the face of the father who had disowned her, the man whose fortune meant nothing to her, and she felt a genuine pang of loss. It wasn't for the man who had cut her off, but for the father she remembered from her childhood, before the money had changed everything. At the same time, she felt a quiet worry for the homeless man Anthony, who had disappeared from the shelter just days before. Her heart had room for them both. The plan was working perfectly, yet it was tearing Victor apart. He had engineered this billionaire's ultimate lesson, but he hadn't fully prepared for the emotional toll of watching his daughter mourn him, even as his sons prepared to cash in. He saw their true characters laid bare by the news of his death. The contrast was a final damning piece of evidence in the father's final test. He was a ghost at his own funeral, seeing everything with painful clarity. The stage was now set for the final confrontation. The world believed he was gone. His heirs were ready to claim their prize. The trap was laid, the cameras were hidden, and the will was ready to be read. The day of reckoning was at hand, a day that promised a public will reading shock of epic proportions. Everything he had worked for, everything he had planned, was about to come to a head. The day of the will reading arrived, a gray and somber morning that perfectly matched the mood, or at least the feigned mood of the Langston family. The boardroom on the top floor of Langston Tower was filled with heavy oak furniture and an even heavier silence. Leo and Marcus arrived first, dressed in impeccable black suits. They nodded gravely at the lawyer, their faces practiced masks of grief, but their eyes held a glint of triumphant expectation. They were about to become kings, the entitled heirs exposed, but not in the way they imagined. They were completely at ease, confident in their birthright. They whispered to each other about corporate restructuring and liquidating certain assets, already dividing the spoils of a kingdom they hadn't yet inherited. Their arrogance was a palpable force in the room, a testament to a lifetime of unearned privilege. They were the stars of their own movie, utterly unaware that the script had been flipped, and they were about to be recast as the villains in a story of wealth versus character. Then, Emma arrived. She was a stark contrast to her brothers, looking out of place in her simple, borrowed dress. She hadn't come for money. The family lawyer had insisted she be present, a formality she assumed. She sat apart from her brothers, a quiet island of genuine sorrow in an ocean of avarice. She was thinking not of her inheritance, but of the father she had lost tuitions to anger, and now to death. She had no idea she was the central figure in the coming inheritance test twist. The lawyer, a man who had been Victor's confidant for decades, cleared his throat. He looked at the faces before him, smug. One saddened, felt the weight of the moment. He knew he was about to detonate a bomb, a carefully crafted device designed by his old friend to deliver the billionaire's ultimate lesson. He pressed a button on a remote, and the large screen on the wall, usually reserved for market projections, flickered to life. Before we begin the reading of the will, the lawyer said, Victor left a final message for you all. Leo and Marcus exchanged a look, a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. They probably expected a sappy posthumous video message full of fatherly advice they had no intention of following. They settled back in their chairs, feigning patient interest, ready to get this sentimental nonsense over with so they could get to the numbers. The trap was sprung. They were sitting front row for a show they thought was in their honor, a public will reading shock designed to dismantle their world. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Emma looked at the screen with a sense of dread, while her brothers looked at it with dismissive impatience. None of them were prepared for what was about to happen. The final act of the father's final test was beginning, and the lives of everyone in that room were about to change forever. The screen lit up with a familiar face, but one they hadn't seen in a very long time. The face on the screen wasn't the aging, sick Victor Langston from the press photos. It was him as they knew him, strong, vital, and with an intensity in his eyes that made them all sit up straight. But he wasn't in his office or his mansion. He was sitting on a simple stool in an empty room, and he looked directly into the camera. If you are watching this, he began, his voice calm and steady, it means my so-called death has been announced. But I am not dead. I am in fact very much alive. The jaws of Leo and Marcus literally dropped. Their masks of grief dissolved into sheer, slack-jawed disbelief. Emma gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. This wasn't a memorial video, this was a hidden identity reveal of the highest order. Victor then explained everything: his disillusionment, his fears for the future of his legacy, and the painful decision to stage the father's final test. He spared no detail, laying out the entire homeless disguise plot from beginning to end. I had to know what was in your hearts, Victor's image said, his voice laced with a sadness that cut through the screen. I had to see who you were when you thought no one of consequence was watching. He then recounted, with painful precision, the encounters with his sons. He described Leo's callous wish to have him removed and Marcus's cruel mockery. The screen then cut to grainy, hidden camera footage of those very moments, a damning and undeniable record of their behavior. The entitled Heirs Exposed portion of the show was brutal and absolute. Then, the tone of the video shifted. But I also saw something else, Victor continued, his voice softening. I saw a depth of character I thought was lost. The video then showed footage of Emma. It showed her giving Anthony the sandwich, the blankets, the coffee. It showed her walking him to the shelter in the freezing cold. It was a montage of quiet, selfless compassion. You see, Victor said, his eyes now glistening, this test was never just about wealth versus character. It was about discovering the true heir to my values. And that heir is Emma. The final blow landed with the force of a physical impact. Therefore, Victor's image declared, I have restructured my entire will. I leave my sons my love and my hope for their redemption. But my entire fortune, every stock, every property, every last dollar of Langston Industries, I leave to the one person who proved that kindness over bloodline is the only legacy worth leaving. I leave everything to my daughter Emma, the declaration. hung in the stunned silence of the room, the estranged daughter chosen as the sole heir. The video ended. The lawyer looked down at the table. Leo and Marcus were pale, their faces a twisted mess of shock and fury. Emma was frozen, tears streaming down her face, a whirlwind of confusion, hurt, and disbelief churning inside her. The public will reading shock was complete. It was more dramatic, more painful, and more profound than anyone, even Victor, could have possibly imagined. The silence that followed was the sound of a family shattering. The silence in the boardroom lasted only a moment before it was shattered by pure, unadulterated rage. "What is this?" Leo roared, leaping to his feet and pointing a shaking finger at the blank screen. "This is insane. He can't do this." The shock had curdled instantly into outrage. Marcus was right behind him, his face purple with fury. "It's a trick. A sick, twisted game. He betrayed us." The accusations flew, loud and venomous, echoing in the opulent room that, just moments ago, they believed was theirs. Their anger wasn't just about the money, it was about the humiliation. They had been publicly unmasked. Their greed and callousness laid bare for all to see. In their minds, this wasn't a fake death, real lesson. It was the ultimate betrayal. They directed their fury at the lawyer, at the memory of their father, at the unfairness of it all. They were so blinded by their entitlement that they couldn't see the truth of their own actions, even when it was played back for them on a giant screen. This was family betrayal and redemption at its most volatile crossroads. Meanwhile, Emma remained seated, completely stunned. She was heartbroken, but for entirely different reasons. The money meant nothing to her. The revelation of the deception was everything. The kind, vulnerable homeless man, Anthony, the one she had worried about and cared for, had been a lie. Her father had manipulated her, had used her kindness as a metric in his cold, calculated test. She felt a profound sense of violation. The intimacy of her compassion twisted into a tool for judgment. The hidden identity reveal had left her feeling exposed and emotionally shattered. Her brothers, in their rage, turned on her. "You were in on this, weren't you?" Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with venom. The perfect little angel playing dad for a fool. They couldn't conceive that her actions were genuine in their transactional world. Everything had a price, and they assumed she had played her part perfectly to win the ultimate prize. They saw her not as a sister, but as a competitor who had outsmarted them in the cruelest inheritance test twist imaginable. Emma could only shake her head, the tears still flowing. She was caught between the explosive rage of her brothers and the crushing weight of her father's deception. She had been chosen, but it felt like a punishment, not a reward. The estranged daughter chosen felt less like a victory and more like a terrible, isolating burden. She had wanted a father, not a fortune, and it seemed she had lost him all over again, this time to his own elaborate, painful games. The room was a maelstrom of raw emotion, outrage, betrayal, heartbreak, and confusion, all swirled together. The carefully constructed world of the Langston family had been blown apart in a matter of minutes. The public reading shock had achieved its goal of revealing the truth. But the fallout was a messy, painful spectacle of a family in ruins. And just when it seemed things couldn't get any more dramatic, a door at the side of the boardroom opened. Into the heart of the emotional storm walked Victor Langston himself. He wasn't on a screen anymore. He was there, in the flesh, looking older and more tired than they had ever seen him. The fury of his sons momentarily froze, replaced by a new wave of disbelief. Emma let out a small, choked sob. The ghost was real. He stood before them, the architect of their pain, his face a canvas of regret and desperate hope. "I know," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "that I have no right to ask, but I am asking for your forgiveness." He looked first at his sons, Leo and Marcus, whose faces were now stone-cold masks of resentment. "I did not do this to hurt you, but to wake you up," Victor pleaded. "I saw you turning into men I didn't recognize, and I was desperate. The money, the empire, It was poisoning you. This was a father's final test. A terrible one, but it came from a place of love. He was offering them a path to family betrayal and redemption, holding out an olive branch in the wake of the bomb he had just detonated. He then turned his gaze to Emma, and his voice broke. "And Emma, I cannot begin to tell you how sorry I am," he said, taking a step toward her. "I betrayed your trust, the most pure and beautiful thing I have ever witnessed. I used your goodness as a measuring stick, and that is unforgivable, what you did. The kindness you showed a stranger. That was the billionaire's ultimate lesson, and you were the one who taught it to me. Can you ever forgive your foolish old father?" He wasn't the powerful titan anymore. He was just a father, stripped of his tricks and his armor, begging his children for a second chance. He explained that the will, as it was read, was real. The fortune was Emma's, but he didn't want the story to end there. He wanted to use this painful legacy of truth as a foundation to rebuild their family, to create something real and lasting, something based on character, not on bank statements. He was offering them a chance to heal, to learn, to become a family again. This was the ultimate pivot. The test was over, and now the work of reconciliation was to begin, if they would let it. He was asking them to look past the deception of the homeless disguise plot and see the intention behind it. He was admitting his own massive failure as a father, his own blindness. He was making himself vulnerable, giving them all the power. It was a final desperate gamble, not for his empire, but for the souls of his children. The choice was now theirs. They could hold on to their anger and their sense of betrayal, or they could accept this painful, flawed offering of a new beginning. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Could a wound that this deep ever truly heal? Could they move past this ultimate deception? The future of the Langston family hung in the balance, resting on the answer to Victor's plea. Emma looked at her father, this flawed, broken man who had caused her so much pain, yet whose love she now understood. However twisted its expression, she saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. Wiping her tears, she took a deep breath and made a choice. It wasn't about the money or the betrayal. It was about the future. "I forgive you, Dad," she said, her voice trembling, but clear. Her acceptance was an act of profound grace, a testament to her belief that compassion wins everything, even in the face of deep hurt. Her forgiveness was the first step toward healing, the first stitch in a torn family fabric. It was a choice to believe in the possibility of a family betrayal and redemption arc. She saw that his methods were wrong, but his motives were rooted in a desperate love. She understood the fake death. Real lesson had been as painful for him as it was for them. In that moment, she wasn't the estranged daughter chosen to be a billionaire. She was simply a daughter choosing to have a father again. But her brothers did not share her sentiment. Leo looked from Emma to his father, his face contorted in a sneer of disgust. "Forgive you?" He spat. "You're insane, both of you." Marcus shook his head, a cold, final look in his eyes. "Keep your money," he said, his voice dripping with ice. "We're done. For them, there was no lesson, only betrayal. The entitled heirs exposed could not handle the exposure." They turned, and without another word, stormed out of the boardroom, slamming the door behind them. Their dramatic exit left a gaping question mark in the room. The story wasn't over. Victor had his daughter back, and he had secured a legacy of truth through her, but his family was still broken, perhaps irreparably. The question of reconciliation with his sons remained wide open, a wound that might never close. What would become of them, stripped of their inheritance and consumed by their anger and pride? Their departure was a stark reminder of how difficult it is to change a person's fundamental character. So, Victor and Emma were left standing in the quiet boardroom, the vast fortune now a tool for a new beginning rather than an endpoint. The billionaire's ultimate lesson had been learned, but the final chapter was yet to be written. The story was no longer about an inheritance test, twist, or a public will reading shock. It was now a quiet, Human story about rebuilding, about what a father and daughter could create from the ashes of a broken family. The path forward was uncertain. Would the brothers ever return? Could they ever understand the lesson their father tried so desperately to teach them? The ultimate legacy of Victor Langston was still in question, hanging between the quiet grace of his daughter and the echoing slam of the door by his sons. The real work, it seemed, had only just begun. What a powerful and emotional journey that was. It really makes you stop and think about what truly defines a person's worth. Victor Langston's extreme test revealed a painful but vital truth. A legacy isn't built with money, it's built with integrity. The clash between wealth versus character is something we see play out in the world every day, but rarely with such a dramatic and eye-opening twist. It's a stark reminder that true wealth is measured by the compassion we show to others, especially when no one is watching. Now, I have to ask you, what part of this story impacted you the most? Was it the cold-hearted betrayal from Leo and Marcus? Or was it the quiet, unwavering grace of Emma, who showed kindness even when she had every reason not to? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear what resonated with you. Did you expect the story to end this way? Or were you hoping for a different outcome for the brothers? If this story gave you something to think about and touched your heart, do me a favor and give this video a thumbs up so more people can find it. And if you love deep dives into human nature and stories that challenge you, make sure you hit that follow button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the incredible journeys we have coming up next. Thanks for watching, and always remember, compassion wins everything.